All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you could join us today for Youth Experience Data, Youth Voice to Inform Your Work. I'm Jocelyn Wiedow. I'm with Sprockets. Sprockets is St. Paul's out of school time network. And so I know that we have some of our St. Paul folks that are joining us today, as well as folks from across Minnesota, as we are collaborating in new ways now that we're virtual, specifically with Ignite and other intermediaries across the state. So just to make a couple of quick notes around that is that I have a couple people helping today, or that will be helping today. So Rachel Oberkhauser is from the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board, and so if there are any questions or things, she'll be able to help with that in the chat. Because of the presentation, I can't necessarily see all of you, but if you have things that you need, if you want to put it in the chat, we'll be watching that. And we're going to be fairly informal today, and so let's get started. Okay, so a couple housekeeping notes. I mentioned we are going to be recording, so that's what's important to know about that is that the recording and the PowerPoint slide deck and some resources will all be shared. Well, at the end of the session today, I'll also email them out, but there is going to be a link that I'm going to share out that'll have a lot of different resources, and then once I have the recording uploaded, that will be on there too. We're going to ask to have people stay muted today unless you're going to talk, which we do encourage, and so don't be nervous to do that, but just so that we can avoid some of the background fun that happens in our different spaces as we work from home or in the office with others. I mentioned the chat, and so please take advantage of the chat to ask questions, to share ideas. And so even though I'm presenting today, I know that we have a wealth of knowledge that are a part of this call today. And so let's make sure we're sharing all of our great ideas with each other. And then the last is video. It is really good for folks to be able to see each other and connect with each other. And we know that, again, there's a lot of other things that are going on. So we'd love to have your video on today. If it's not going to work for you, that's okay too, especially if it interferes with your reception, because we want to make sure that you're able to get the information as we go. So that's a little bit of our housekeeping pieces. Objectives for today. And so my objective is that we're going to really demonstrate some tangible and engaging ways to gather input, feedback, and youth experience data. My thought is I'm going to go through a bunch of different things as examples. We're not going to go too deep into the weeds on any one of them, mainly because these are just examples, and you all know your context and your program and your interests, and we'll refine them to work for you. If we go through any platforms that you're like, oh, but I don't really understand how to use this, I'll do a little bit of that. We do have some other resources that go deeper and would certainly be willing to do kind of some one-off workshops that's specifically about platforms if that is helpful for people. But really wanted to get people thinking about new and different ways that we could be engaging youth voice and getting their feedback and helping inform the work that we're doing. Now, I know you all might have some objectives as well, and so what we're going to be doing is we're going to take an opportunity to get into some small groups so you all can introduce each other to each other and be able to share about what it is that you hope to get out of today. And one of the things with that is that I'm hoping as you're talking and sharing what you hope to get out of today, that one person will be willing to come back and share that with the group just so we can all hear and hopefully add to some of the content that might be happening today that will meet your needs as well. So I'm going to send you out to rooms. I think lots of folks have been in Zoom, but for those who haven't, you're going to be swished off into a room. There is a little button if you have questions. I can come in and help you with that. We are going to spend just about 8 minutes in those rooms, and so sometimes that means you don't have quite enough time, and other times it means that you have a little extra time. That's gifted time to you. You can then talk about the weather or other things if you need to. But excited for you all to get to know each other, and we'll see you back here in about 8 minutes. Well, welcome back, everyone. And so I think we had, well, I forget now, about like 4 breakout rooms. And so I'm hoping that there's 4 volunteers that will share a little bit about what were some other objectives that people were hoping to achieve from today. So do we have anybody who's willing to share out? Go ahead and unmute. Introduce yourself and and what things you're thinking about.
Hello, my name is Keisha Anderson King. I was in the breakout room with Rachel, myself, Crystal, Julie Murphy, and Shanita Young. And basically from what we're all looking for out of this session is basically on improving data and paperwork for families.
All right, great. And you have set the bar high. So every other group, don't feel like you have to know everyone who was in your group, but thank you. That was really wonderful. Others?
This is Shaquana. I could share what our group talked about. So we were kind of talking about the connection of programming and everything. So what folks are currently doing. I had threw a question out there asking folks, you know, are they currently doing programming now? And Jennifer Mulligan was saying how she, you know, is doing programming throughout the whole time before and after COVID, and that connecting with 18 to 20-year-olds are kind of a struggle and still looking at doing that. And I kind of expressed what I've been struggling with is recruiting youth. So it seems like when we were talking, it was kind of like learning a new structure of this virtual setting for young people, focusing on like how do we get the hands-on versus, you know, not being in person and being virtual, and just different things to bringing up a conversation about, you know, what we will get out of this. So hopefully we'll learn what to do and go back and share with our organizations to move forward. And if I missed anything, anyone please jump in. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shaquana. Yeah, I do think that part of just coming together and hearing what other people do is really valuable. We are going to do small groups again towards the end. And so we don't have as much of that time, but we are looking to continue to bring people together, even just for that sharing purpose. And so hopefully we'll get a little bit of that in today. I will say the things that I'm going to be showing today, I'm trying to frame them, thinking about the information and the data that we can maybe collect but that engagement piece, even some of the things I'll show you weren't actually, I did not do them to necessarily get experience data. It's about that engagement and how do we like keep young people involved in the program, even when it's virtual. The other piece is that recruitment piece. And so it doesn't matter how amazing you have your program ready to go if people don't know about it. So that's definitely an important piece too. I'm not sure how much we'll touch on that today, but I do think that that is something that we're going to continue to have conversations about. I think we have 2 more groups. Is someone else ready to go next?
I can go for our group. I'm Angela Belmont. Our group talked a lot about kind of like youth voice and capturing youth feedback, finding ways that are better than just, you know, surveys. We talked about, you know, even my program, we gather data around youth participation and youth experience through survey, and we're all kind of really trying to figure out ways to get better at feedback from our participants. And that kind of dominated our conversation mostly.
Yeah, great. And so I will not be doing, here's how you create a survey, because we know that most folks have been doing that. If you actually need that, let me know. I mean, I have some information on that as well, but yeah, that's not what we're going to be doing today. It is going to be like just thinking of creative ways to be able to connect and get some of that feedback. So that's great. Thank you. Is that last group someone willing to go? Anyone?
I can talk about what our group talked about. So
Thanks,
a couple of our group members, we couldn't hear them, so I don't know what's going on, but we talked about one group member whose church has a youth council and how they're kind of working on building those relationships so the youth know that their voices are valued. And then another group member talked about how kind of her ideal for a program would be youth run, adult supported, and how that's like a great ideal and it's just hard to get there. So that was kind of what we talked about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so a couple of things is that, yeah, wanting things to be youth-led, and even for programs that when they were meeting in person, were at that stage where they had young people ready to go, where it's like for many of us, it's starting over because the platforms and how we're connecting is starting over. So that certainly is. And the other thing I really appreciated from that report out, Andrea, was to be able to make sure that young people recognize that their voices are honored and heard. And so it's not just about getting the information, but it's about really being transparent about what's going to happen with that information and to see what kind of responses that happen from that. So thank you all for sharing that. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to touch on a lot of those things as well as we continue on today. So our agenda, the first thing, icebreaker, check, that's off the list. We're going to talk a little bit about our current context, what things we want to know, kind of get those pieces as our foundation. And then I really am going to be burning through a bunch of different examples. If I end up going too fast and you want me to stop and you have questions, please do interrupt. Not a problem with that. And we would not be a youth development workshop if we didn't end with some reflection. So context. So we know that right now we are in the middle of a global pandemic, which has kind of thrown us all for a loop. We also know that although systemic racism has been here for hundreds of years, that people are listening and paying attention in a different way, and maybe a different group of people. Obviously, again, it's been around, but this intersection of these two pandemics has really made the community have a lot of hurt and a lot of different areas and needs that we haven't necessarily noticed before. Funders are part of our context. They've been very generous during the pandemic in terms of flexibility with when we think about data and how funds are used. And they're still trying to figure out what does this mean long term and how do things go forward. And so we need to think about what our funders or other stakeholders are thinking. Our programming has changed. So as one of the breakout groups mentioned, we have some programs that have been operating during this whole time, whether it was virtual or in person or some combination of that. Some programs have dabbled in some things. Others still aren't doing it yet. So we've got all these different contexts in that sense. Participation is the other thing that came up. Even the young people that were really active and engaged in participating prior to COVID, we've not been able to connect with all before. And new folks are looking for connections, but not really sure where. So our participation numbers may be very different. The consistency may be very different. And then what else? So I have on there the question mark because there's a lot of other things. And so in the chat, are there some other things that you can think about right now that are also causing your program pause and trying to figure out what to do next? I'll pause for just a minute and see if there's other folks that can come up with some ideas. I think about things like even, we talk about how community is dealing with all of this stuff that's going on right now. Well, our staff are also part of that community. And so the staff insecurity, whether it is about their jobs or how to do their work. I see Amy talks about the 21st Century Funds on distant learning days. And so trying to figure out how to do that combination. When you have partnerships with schools, or some other things might be that. There's political elections that are also in the air right now that add a whole nother layer to kind of what people are thinking about and trying to balance. So lots of things that are going on for sure. So again, I'm going to ask you to start going into the chat. What do you want to know from your young people? What are some of the things that you're thinking about? And I'm not going to hold you to these, but let's just brainstorm. What are some of the things that either you or you think other partners might be wanting to know from their young people as they are engaging in, whether it's programming or connecting? What things do they need right now? How are they really, right? It's easy to say, hey, how are you? But like, really, how are you? Trying to find out what things are going on, what they're passionate about, what types of program they want to see in their community. What do politics mean to our young people? What are they thinking about that? How do they want to engage? How can we help you? How can we, they're going so quick now. What they want to do, finding things that they don't know that they like to do. So yeah, lots of different things are continuing to go through the chat that you can continue to add to those as well. So here's what I was thinking about, and many of these kind of fit into the buckets, although I would say that third one, like, what are the things that they need? would be another piece to this. But I'm thinking about two categories specifically when we think about programming. And one is experience. What aspects of how participants are experiencing your program do you want to know more insight around? So what are those pieces? Is it, do they feel safe? Is it how they feel connected? What things that they enjoy to do? So some of those things that were in the chat. And the other thing I think about is that kind of sense of self. What skill areas or self-perceptions do they, what do they have? And that may, what you're wondering about may be impacted by what the goals of your program are. And so these kind of sense of self or self-competencies are things that we want to know about too. I want to pause just a minute to note that when we think about data, especially if you've been a part of some of the M3 and continuous program improvement things, when we think about the 4 areas of data, youth experience data, that's the data that a young person, it's like their perception of, it's their experience, it's coming from them. And then youth outcome data is the impact a program has on youth. So sometimes that youth outcome data comes from youth. They're talking about their experience as well. And so we're talking about experience data today, but I just wanted to acknowledge that sometimes there's that overlap between that outcomes as well when we talk about those 2 areas of data. But they both are the youth's perception of their experience or of how they are doing. The other thing I was thinking about is, why do we want to know information? So if we're going to be collecting information, why do we want to know it? And I'm going to frame it in 2 different ways, and I know many of you have heard this before, but we think about, what do we want to know to prove that we're demonstrating an impact in our, of our program, and that we can highlight successes, right? And so like, we want information to show we are a good program, we're doing some really great things. And the other thing is about improving. And so that's more formative. How can we gather some information that can help us inform the work that we're doing with young people, to be responsive to their needs, to make adjustments, to make improvements. And so as we talk about today, there are ways that we can hit all of these things through different combinations, but you need to understand, what is it that I'm going to be asking and why am I asking it, as you think about what are the strategies for collecting the information. One more thing before we start getting into, well, we will take a pause and then start getting into some of the examples. The other things to consider are, is it identifiable information? So can you tell the demographics, who said things, break it down by ages, or is it anonymous, where it would be an aggregate amount that is represented by whoever completes it? If it is identifiable, is it going to be confidential? And so making sure that young people know that you're not going to be sharing their name, or is it that they are going to be? That just is really clarifying and being open and honest with young people about that. The other thing I've been talking a lot about lately as I've moved to virtual spaces is thinking about process versus product. So some of the things I'm going to show you today, there's an end product, there's something that you can show, you can count, or have some numbers around with. But a lot of times it's a process. So what the end result is kind of messy, but the conversation that happens because of it is that process that's really valuable. And so thinking about, is a process going to be what I need, or actually do I need an end product, and how do I do that? Sometimes it might mean recording the conversation and then theming out the results to have like an end product. So that would be another consideration. And then the last one, who, how, and when will you reflect? So don't collect information if you're not going to do something with it, right? And so sometimes it's a matter of, we're going to have this conversation, we're going to reflect right now, and then we're going to make some adjustments. Other times it might be that you're going to be bringing that information to share with other people. Who are those people? Are they other staff, administration, young people? And then when. And so being just really thoughtful about responsiveness. The when right now is a little bit different than what our when would have been before. So when we used to think about, it sounds like so long ago, but in the past, we've thought about the continuous program improvement over a school year. So how do we collect data in the fall? We're assessing. How do we use that information to create an improvement plan that we can adjust our program, change the experience, improve it during that school year while young people are there? Right now, the when, we've been talking about these rapid cycle reflections. It might be that we're going to be reflecting each time that we meet with our young people. It could be once a week, it could be once a month. But that thinking about when and that timeliness and being responsive as well. So I'm going to pause for a minute just to see if there are any questions about kind of this foundation before we like start zooming into some examples. All right, if there are, you can stick them in the chat, but we are going to continue to move on because we have a lot of things to talk about today. So Mentimeter, some of you may know this. I'm going to invite you right now to either open up the chat, or not the chat, but go look in the chat. And it's menti.com. And then you're going to put in this code. And even though there's spaces in that code, you don't have to put them in that way. It just makes it easier to read. So you could open up another browser on your computer, or you could use your phone. And there's 2 questions that I'm going to invite you to answer. And then we're going to look at those in just a minute. But while you are doing your own Menti, I'm going to give you 4 examples of how I have used Menti this past summer with young people in our program. And so I mentioned before I'm with Sprockets, we typically don't run out of school time programs. So it had been about 10 years since I ran my own full youth program and was a programmer and kind of designing things. We have been doing some youth employment work though, and this summer we hosted 10 young people. They were high school age, a couple had graduated as well. So we had 10 young people that worked virtually from home 20 to 25 hours a week. And so I'm going to share with you some examples of how we use Menti to engage those young people. So again, a reminder, I'm going to move to the next screen, but the Menti and the chat are in the code are in the chat. So this was one of the things that had come up, I think in the report outs or in the chat was, what community topic is important to you? So we had a group of young people that were going to be doing some work specifically around COVID messaging, some PSAs. And so we wanted to, one, get an opportunity to learn about each other and build community. So like I said, it wasn't specifically that we were going to use this for experience data. That's not necessarily what we were thinking. We were thinking about what things are they passionate about? How do we know each other a little bit better? We were trying to lay that groundwork, just thinking about that, understanding yourself and what's important to you. And with Menti, all of the things are confidential. So they would answer with these word clouds. So this is an example of a word cloud template. You can have them answer as many times as possible. And so, you know, I think put like 5, they could put 5 different issues. And for us, this actually was one of those final product type of things. So we did a presentation at the end of the summer, included this because it gives a little snapshot of who our young people are. We also have a virtual staff page. It was like a Google site. And we had it posted on there kind of for them to be able to see and remember. And so, you know, we had that kind of decoration that came from them. And then as they were filling this out in real time, it continued to evolve and grow on the screen. And so when we think about the who looks at it and when do we look at it, we looked at it together in real time as it was going. Now, if you were looking to do this for to get some experience feedback that's anonymous, that could generate a lot of things. It might be questions about like, what words best describe how you feel about our program or about this subject or about this topic? What is most important to you in thinking about these things? What topics would you be interested in exploring? So again, there's no wrong answers. Word clouds, when the same word is used, it gets bigger, right? So we know that that's not a perfect science because sometimes people will spell things wrong or they might use it a different phrasing, but it is a great visual to have. Here is one, so again, they were doing some COVID messaging, so they were doing things with memes. It was an 8-week program. We were in week 5, and we knew that it was starting to get a little bit stressful. They were making a lot of things. We were just about to start getting them out. So at one of our morning meetings, we did a Mentimeter using memes, and they were asked to see which one resonates with them. So again, we looked at it in real time. It helped us to improve. So we didn't necessarily use this for to share out with others. We talked about it. It was great conversation in a fun way to acknowledge that, yeah, right now we have all of these things. Being able to track them in all our folders was really challenging, and then come up with some ideas on how we could adjust that. JIC, just because I think that one's such a cute one, is the Joint Information Committee from the city. So they had to review and give us feedback on the things before we sent them out, just to make sure that they it was great because they had provided some really helpful feedback, but we would love to get it. And so I know they were waiting for those things. So again, an example that allowed us to reflect together about that process, have conversations, and make some adjustments. The next one was, and this was one of my favorite, we did a shout out board. So this is open-ended. So you could use this in a lot of different ways to get feedback from people on what they enjoy. We had done it as a shout out. The goal was to have a way for them to show gratitude to each other. They did not know each other before coming into this opportunity together. With the Mentimeter, and again, it's one of those things we're not going to go into in detail, but if you wanted to know more, I'd gladly meet with you. But we embedded this into their virtual office space on the Google Sites. So for a week, that code was up and they could go in there. So we had 10 young people, like 35 responses were in here, and it was a way for them to show gratitude. What we didn't actually think about, and it was not intentional, was that it also provided us some feedback. So even just looking at a couple of these examples, it helped me realize that, oh, okay, people did feel welcome as they were starting in on their first week. They were making connections with other people. They were demonstrating leadership. So it provided us that feedback that we wouldn't have necessarily known, right? We know that working in virtual spaces is, it's hard sometimes to know kind of what is happening on the other end, what people are thinking, how they're feeling about it. And so that was really helpful. Now I mentioned this was week 1. By week 4, there was a lot fewer responses on our shout out board. So we thought, well, we're going to see, maybe we shouldn't, should we keep doing it? Maybe we shouldn't. So I sent out a mentee that said, hey, we want to get your feedback. Now I made it so it showed percentages. You can also make it so it shows a count. What this did tell me, one, obviously that they were split, but what it told me also was that there was little energy around it because that 50-50 actually represents 2 counts each. So less than half of our young people even completed it. So that was some data for me, even without being the data. There was a second slide, similar to the one that you hopefully are all finishing up right now, that asked a question, and if they didn't think, what suggestions would they have to show gratitude? And nobody answered that either. So we had to switch gears a little bit. So this final example, before we look at our Menti slides, was kind of what we did for follow-up. So this is like a think, pair, share. Again, I mentioned ours were high school and college age young people. So they were able to meet in small groups that they kind of self-organized. So we provided this document and asked them to look through our website, look through the different tabs, and reflect on these questions. What was the purpose of that page? What did they like about it? What could be changed? And then meet in their small group. And then they would fill this form out as a small group and having conversation. And then after they filled it out, we have 3 different copies of that one of our young people took, kind of consolidated it, came up with some recommendations, and then we changed our virtual office based on those recommendations. And so one of the things that we decided to do was to stop doing the shout out board, but they did want to, we had our end of the day huddles to take some time to provide gratitude there. So we were able to continue with that piece. So, and that was a lot of talking. I told you we have a lot of stuff to get through, but I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Well, actually I can still share. I think I'll just get out of this so that we can look at the Menti. So I'm going to present, the first question was around what age group that you all primarily work with. So we have all across the board from elementary through adults. I didn't expect pre-K, but I want people to feel welcome. So that was one. And then the other, let's see, I got to go back here. So this is an example of kind of that not ranking, but a scale. And so trying to have a sense about, for as a group, where is our experience in creating surveys or administering surveys, our confidence in online activities, and enjoy in learning new things. So I did these partially so I could have a sense from all of you kind of where you are today in terms of these things, but also to show you an example of how this might be helpful in thinking about that product piece. And so these are specific scores. It shows kind of some averages. Again, it's an aggregate, so it's not identifiable. And but it gives you something that you could share out if you're looking to do that in an easy way. And it's something you could also then share with other people. And if you see as I hover over it, you can also see kind of how those things are dispersed as well. Any questions about Mentimeter before we move on? Okay, I just have to minute here so I can get everybody back in. All right, so the next thing then, and thank you, Clorinda. This is all because of a comment that she made the other day on the Ignite kickoff, was asking about photo voice, or photo storytelling, just different things like that. And so I wanted to make sure that I took an opportunity to bring that in as well. And so this is an example from partners of ours from Urban Roots, and they were part of the SEL learning cohort that we did in partnership with the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board, so we Sprockets, and then also Ignite and the Brooklyn Alliance for Youth as well. And part of the goal of their SEL cohort was to do some kind of a youth or community engagement process where they were getting information in. So when people think about photo voice or photo story or digital storytelling, that might mean a lot of different things to them. And so I know for photo voice, some people, it's like about visual research with a goal of social change, lifting up the voices of those who aren't always heard, that it's a process where they use video or photo images to capture their environment, their experience, their perspectives, to share and inspire change. A lot of times it could also be around public or perceptions or policymaker perceptions. And so this is one example, and I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that people could modify it to make it work for them. So this is a program that is not an arts-based program necessarily. They are an urban gardening, urban farming programming and youth employment. And their original plan, they did want to amplify youth voice through their photo project. They want to do something that was fun and engaging way to document the different narratives of young people that are a part of their program. Their goal was to share it with those perspectives with the staff team and with its administration and other stakeholders. They wanted to have that information, one, to learn about their participants, but also think about how they could continue to program to meet what the needs of our participants were. They were starting with their advisory group. The goal was that their advisory group, they would give them a weekly prompt. During the week, they would even get paid an extra hour to go out, take a picture, and when they came back together, they would use those photos to have a conversation and like a focus group that would help them to gather some more information just based on what people's stories were from those photos, so that they could go a little bit deeper. The questions that they were thinking about was how young people saw themselves, how they saw their program, so how they saw Urban Roots, and how they felt that they fit into community. So, so they did that, and they learned a lot of different lessons. And so when I was talking with David, oh, hopefully there's a little IT thing that came up, so I'm hoping that's not going to interfere with us today. When I was talking with David, he was telling me some of his lessons learned. So the process did evolve. They realized that the original concept, that the questions were too vague, and because their young people did not have kind of a foundation in taking, photography and doing that piece, that they weren't really quite sure what they were supposed to do when they went out. And so they had iPads available to them. They had some cameras that were available to them. Most of them they just used their phones. And so his suggestions were thinking about more specific type of questions. So maybe start out with things like, take a picture of something that represents safety in community too, or represents coming together. So very specific things as they were getting used to doing that type of project. The other thing he said, that even though they were getting paid that extra hour for kind of homework, that many times they would come and they hadn't taken their picture, they forgot, or just kind of didn't do it. And so he said that in the future, they would probably do it as part of their time together in person. Then they could say, where should we go? And then kind of go in an area and take pictures. I imagine in virtual, and what we did in our program is we would say, okay, you've got the next 2 hours to go do this, and we're going to meet back, so that it's a little bit more contained. And since they didn't always, when their advisory group was meeting, have pictures to have that conversation, they ended up coming up with a different plan. And so they started asking the young people what they would want to know, and they divided into some different groups. One group created kind of this backdrop, and the other group created the questions. And they ended up having this kind of photo booth or selfie station. And this will really allow them to gather actually even more feedback in a different way. And so instead of just being their advisory group, they created and led that project, and then would bring in the other young people from the program to come and answer these questions that the young people had come up with. And so it was about what is their happiness, I think was one of them, and what's the other one, is what their feelings were about urban roots. Here's some of the things that they did learn by going through all of these eraser boards. Family is a big part of a youth's identity, not only their own family, but their urban roots as their family. Youth are recognizing growth in themselves, especially in how they're interacting with their peers. Food was also a big part, which is not surprising because Urban Roots does a lot around food, but that was definitely a big part of identity as well. And that youth recognized that Urban Roots as a place of opportunity for them. So they were very transparent that their original plan was ambitious, but felt like the adjustments they made were really meaningful. They continue to incorporate the arts now into the projects. They're doing a project with a artist that they're contracting with to help with some of those kind of interviewing and photography pieces, but it's about river stories about the Mississippi. So in a different way, but he said that it was a really valuable process for them in bringing this in an engaging way to collect some of those stories together. All right, I'm going to pause again. Questions, or has anybody done any photo story stuff in their programs in the past?
I put this in the chat, Jocelyn, but I just feel like it's a really cool way that doesn't, rely on students to feel confident in their writing skills, especially when students are part of a school system where, you're supposed to put your final draft forward, right? And yet, like every student is at least able, there's selfies, like that's all I have to say, right? Right. So taking photos is something that, has something students feel more comfortable and like confident in, even if they don't have to be great pictures or anything. Yeah. And so it's almost like even if you are in a home environment or just like regardless, you're able to kind of recognize what things do support you. Like maybe you really love ramen and, or it's the plants outside, or maybe it's a neighbor, or, developing your support system by kind of reflecting. And in that process, like creating yourself almost like in a way that, you always were and nothing's changed. But, by that recognition and that affirmation, you're creating more of a support for yourself, that support, that buffer, that like safety network. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that idea, because I do think it's a really valuable one. And one of the things is we know, again, that very few programs are specifically a, photojournalist art type program, right? And so thinking about how do you weave these things into the context of your program. He did say they had one of their staff who came in and talked for about half an hour about, about taking pictures and like angles, or I can't remember what it's called, but how like they talk about like your image in thirds and 2/3 or whatever that is, right? You can do a quick Google search and find some like tips just to kind of give them some information. There are people who will work with a consultant or someone who knows more about it and can do like a multi-week training on it. I mean, that's possible as well, but the reality is for most of our programs, just some basics and using that for that conversation was really important. So again, this was both product, right, and the process and the conversations that happen because of it. And so it can be a really easy kind of way to kind of get young people's voice heard on a variety of topics. Again, the takeaway was to kind of scaffold it, like start with really specific, or maybe even start with things that aren't like super personal, so that they can kind of build up that confidence along the way as well, would be an idea. All right, so the next things we're going to kind of dive into are some other platforms that I have used.
Hey, Jocelyn,
Yes.
can I just add one piece before you move on? Because I think the photo thing is just really a great option. I like what Kalinda said around how it's about sharing part of yourself. And I know this summer in 4-H, we would frequently ask kids to share photos of what they had done. So there may be a session that we've had, some learning, and then they would share it so that it could be posted on the next session as part of that scaffold learning that you talked about, but really a way to celebrate their successes, you mentioned youth voice. I think there's so much that can be done with photos that really can be simple, and then young people get to determine how much they are able or willing to share about a particular project. So I think that's really cool. And it's the rule of thirds, by the way. And I only know that because I sat in. I sat in on I actually observed one of our 4-H photography sessions. So that was language for me too. So very nice.
Yes, thank you. I didn't have that in my notes, but I knew there was a word. Yes, thank you, Kalinda, for answering that question in the chat too about when young people don't have phones. So especially when you think about younger ages as well, and I know all ages, not everyone has a phone, but seeing if they could borrow a family member's phone as well. I do think right now, because we are virtual, that this does create an opportunity for, doing some capturing what is it you're doing so that we can have that to talk about. The other thing I was thinking about, and I'm not talking about it today so much, but focus groups, right? And so using images that other people created as a way to spur conversation and what that means to them would also be a way to use those pictures. All right, we're gonna go behind the scenes here again into show you a few of these other resources. And so one of them is Jamboard. Jamboard's a Google product. I have a little 3 or 4 minute video we'll share later, but if you want to know more about how to use Jamboard, but you can make it shareable, put it in the link so people can use it. So one of the ways that we used it this summer, we knew one of the skills that we wanted to make sure young people had was the preparedness to work from home. So they each kind of read an article individually and then presented to the group what they learned from that article about working from home. And then what we had them do was they each had their own, I just have their initial on here. It had their names when they came to it. It was prepared, but put up these Post-it notes either on the one side, like, I got this. This is where I'm ready to go from working from home. And here's some things that I need to work on still. And so they created these as a reflective process, but all of the, each of them had their own slides. You can see, you can do the drop down. You can also download this as a PDF. So this is, again, an example of, it's about the process, not the product, although you can have a product. We can go through here and reflect on all of these different ones to kind of see, are there themes, different things like that. It's not particularly visually appealing, but it is a great opportunity to capture where they are in their sense of how prepared they are, what things they might need some extra supports on. So there's a lot of different ways you might be able to use Jamboard, but here's some things that I was thinking about. So similar to what I just showed you, some kind of reflection on concepts. It could be using photos, either images or as a collage or photo responses. So there is a way to do a quick search. And so maybe I felt like this image really resonated with me about how I felt about today's workshop. We could put it on there. We could do a photo, like a gallery walk, and have everybody use their slide as we kind of go through to explain their image and how it reflected what they were thinking about that activity. And again, that idea of doing some kind of a focus group. So it is one way to create this process that folks could use. The other thing, I love Post-its, and this has a bulletin board. It's called pinup.com. It's free. And so one of the activities that we thought, we did it for a different activity. We used this, but you'll see that there's Post-it notes around, and I just put skill on it. But when you think about what are the skills that you want young people in your program to be learning or that you're working on, you can have those around, put all your friends' names in the middle, and so that when they come in, again, you just share the link in the chat with them. They do have to create an account. So again, for younger kids, that might be tricky unless it's something that you use a lot. But then as you ask questions about what skills you feel like you're really strong in, they could go put their name on that Post-it. what things you want to learn more about, they can move it to that other skill. So to me, these corkboard is like anything that you would do in a room where people get up and moving. So if you ever have done something where you put 8.5 by 11 sheets around the room and ask people to go move to where your answer is, this would work in that same sense. So for example, these kind of highlighter yellow ones that are in the four corners, I could have written on there strongly disagree, disagree, agree, and strongly agree. And I could ask questions and everyone gets to move their little thing. It's a little bit more interactive, visual. We're kind of seeing what other people think as well during that piece of it there. And so again, anything that you would do in person, you suddenly have your little name and they can move them around. While I have this up, I am going to show you, this is the link that I'm going to send later that has resources. It's an ongoing, it's got all kinds of resources from all different workshops. The youth experience one, the recording will be here, the slides are already here. And the other thing I want to point out is Public Profit. They have an amazing website and resources. They're out of California, but they have a document that they had put together as creative ways to solicit youth input, I think is what it's called. And then since then, they've created some stakeholders and tip sheets that are kind of smaller versions. But when you think about like gallery walks, the four corners, just different things like that, they're all these different activities. They have some ones around photo voice as well. It's just about thinking of these different platforms and how do you take those activities that we would normally do in person and do them in a virtual space instead. So that brings us back to our, there we go, our presentation. We're going to get ready to go back into breakout rooms again. This time you'll have about, I think I'll do about 12 minutes. And in your breakout rooms, what I want for you, well, you can spend the time whatever meets your needs, but what my thought was, is that it's an opportunity to start thinking. I talked about a lot of different ideas, platforms, and kind of just different questions or the why, all those pieces. Spend some time reflecting and talking about what are some of the things that you heard that you want to explore a little bit more deeply, and some of the things that you maybe have been thinking about or you've done that you want to share with the group as well. And so I'm going to have you do that in just a minute. Now we have one of the groups is a little bit smaller, so I'm going to move a couple of folks just to even out our rooms a bit. So you might be meeting some new folks, so take a minute to introduce each other. But we are going to come back here in about 12 minutes, 11 minutes or so. All right, if you need help or if you have any questions, make sure that you just ask and I'll come pop in. So I hope that you had some good conversations, some starter conversations, because we should still continue to connect and converse, but we're not done yet. So we have a couple more things I did want to show you. And one of them is, oops, there we go, annotation. So I know when I talk about process and product, to me, the annotation feature is really about the process. And so I don't know how many of you have used annotate before, but you'll see that when someone's sharing their, oh, am I sharing? I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Do you see my screen? Yes, okay. Usually it has a thing on it and I don't see it.
Yeah, like you kind of seem to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, there it is. Whew, see, I couldn't find my navigation bar. So on the navigation bar, you'll see the, there's like a little thing that talks about view options. And when you pull that down, there's like this annotate. And so if you have not used annotate before, that's where you would find it. And then it comes up with this kind of little navigation bar. And so I did not do this with our group this summer, but I wish that I had, you know, again, it's next time I will. But in their first week, they created, we know group agreements are really important. They were going to be working together for 8 weeks. And so this is an example of their group agreements. What I think would have been really interesting, maybe a week or two in, was to have put this up on annotation. And you can feel free if you want to practice, if you've not done annotation before, to maybe put a little star. So those stamps, they have like a star by the things that they feel like, yeah, we've got this. This is going really well. Or maybe put like an arrow or some other kind of mark by the things that maybe they thought we needed to work on. So again, with annotation, it is anonymous. There is a way with this, the spotlight, there's one function where it will put whose name it is, but it's anonymous. It's a way to get some kind of group feedback. And then in real time, we see like, oh, yeah, maybe we should be working on this. You know, a couple of you have brought that up without calling anybody out, and then you can problem solve some things together. The one thing with the annotate feature is that because I'm on a slide deck, the minute that I then forward the slide to something else, all of this is still going to be on. And so I'm going to go ahead and clear all of the drawings from here so we can move on. But the other thing with the annotation, if you wanted to have a product or something to reflect on later, you also need to remember to save it. And so those are some key things to make sure to do with that. We are going to have a chance for everybody right now to open up their annotate and then think about like your own reflection, right? So this is an opportunity for me to get information from you all on how comfortable or how ready are you feeling to creatively get experience data. And so whatever marker stamp that you choose, if you're feeling like, yeah, I've totally got some really great ideas, I have an audience in mind, then you put it in the middle of the target. If you're like, I'm in my stretch zone, I get it, I need to practice with maybe some of these different platforms or think about this with my team. And if you're like way overwhelmed, it was a lot of information, have no idea where to start, then it's okay, you know, claim that, you're kind of in that red zone. And so this is a way to, again, use that annotate to get some feedback. Another way that I've done this a lot, and when Clorinda was talking about like photos, I'm a huge one for putting photos on the screen, and it might be animals with different expressions or different locations, and asking people which picture resonates most with them. And then we can just do it and see it, or we could open it up and be like, oh, I see we have some folks in this area. You know, is there someone who's willing to talk a little bit about that? So it also creates, again, that space to have conversations. And again, I'm going to clear all of the drawings. Oops, that's my own. I don't want to do that.
I just have to say, Jocelyn, that I've known you for just a minute, and I feel that it's so incredible how you take these practices and kind of facilitation techniques that we're used to being able to do in a room and just make it feel like anything is possible digitally. It's so creative and awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Clorinda. You always make me feel so good. And I do think for the most part, any of these things are possible. We do know age matters, right? I know younger kids, things need to be adapted a little bit and how they navigate and making things really easy. But when you find, like I said, I use Minty all the time. If you do that with young people, they'll know when I say, you know, get out your Minty, they'll know what that means. And so part of it is just like that scaffolding and having them to know it. The other thing is the group sizes, right? When you have a large group, it's a little bit harder to do those small group conversations. Right now, I know for a lot of programs, they are working in smaller groups. And so if you don't have the ability to do breakout rooms, which I know is not always possible in youth programming, that there are some other ways to kind of think about that. I do want to point out, there's a couple different things. So if you can stand, continue to stand. We have a few more minutes left. And I figured if there's folks who want to talk.
Jocelyn, can I just?
After I will. Yeah, Jen. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add one piece. I shared, we have found it just a cute story in our region. I work in the Northeast region for 4-H, and I was sharing in the small group the annotation features, like one, I don't want to be negative, but a word of caution, like depending upon the group, we had one young lady that absolutely totally embraced all of the features of chat and annotation, and we would see cats popping up as we were presenting in different spaces and places, and so being clear, you know, we think about group norms and expectations and creating those with young people in the group. And because while most people enjoy cats, they can be a distraction at times too. And so thinking about the flip side of how do we help kids recognize that this can be really fun, but we also have to respect the tools and because it's a privilege to be able to do all those things, right?
Yep, and I think that's a really important piece is talking about those norms and why it's important and how do we respect that time. So thank you for adding that piece in as well, Jan. These are some upcoming workshops to keep on your radar, and there will be emails coming out with the registration for those as well. And so I encourage you to think about those. The introduction to building youth adult continuous program improvement teams. We have some young people along with New Yang who are going to be leading that one. It is an evening because that's when our young people are available. And we also know that for programs who have young people that are ready for those leadership roles, that you can invite them. It is young people and adults can do that as well. Clendra, I saw with about the registration things, if you could, or one of you can find on the Sprockets website under program, that the links are going to be there. Not all of them are yet. And if you are on like the Ignite email list, it'll be coming out from there as well.
Yes, and if you're in our network, then I will also be following up as we have more registration links. So keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, and so again, that was one of the really exciting pieces about being virtual is that we're able to collaborate. And as you all know, with collaboration, everything takes a little bit longer, but we're really excited about doing that. Another resource I just need to share really quick. So this slide deck, I put on there slidesgo.com. They have a bazillion. So if you have the flexibility to be able to create slides and use slides with your young people, they have a lot of really fun graphics and things. So I just wanted to plug that as well. My email is on there. So if there are things that you want to follow up on, please let me know. And I certainly can do, I talk about sandboxes, like let's get together in a virtual space and kind of play around with things if you're wanting to know how things work kind of behind the scenes. And so I would welcome that as well. And so I am going to stay on for a few minutes and we can look behind the scenes, or if people have some specific questions, I would gladly host those. But otherwise, really excited and thank you all for coming today, and look forward to seeing you in other spaces virtually.